On February 10, 2025, a tragic accident occurred at Scottsdale Airport in Arizona involving a Learjet 35A registered as November 18 Victor November. The jet, owned by Mötley Crüe's lead singer Vince Neil through his company Chromed in Hollywood Inc., was arriving from Austin-Bergstrom International Airport in Texas when it veered off the runway upon landing. Unfortunately, the aircraft collided with a parked Gulfstream G200, leading to a fatal outcome. Let's see what we've got. The Learjet 35A, a private business jet manufactured in 1989, was carrying 4 people, 2 pilots and 2 passengers. The pilot tragically lost his life in the accident. The co-pilot survived but sustained serious injuries. Among the passengers were Rain Hannah Andreani, Vince Neil's girlfriend, who suffered 5 broken ribs, and her friend Ashley, whose injuries were not specified but was also hospitalized. Despite the severity of the crash, 3 of the 4 occupants survived. Vince Neil himself was not on board at the time of the accident. The incident led to a temporary closure of Scottsdale Airport's runway as authorities conducted their investigation. Both the NTSB and the FAA are now looking into the circumstances surrounding the crash to determine exactly what happened. This heartbreaking event has drawn significant media attention, especially due to its connection to a well-known musician. While details on the exact cause are still under investigation, the focus remains on the survivor's recovery and the ongoing aviation safety review. So as investigators work to uncover the cause of the crash, a key area of focus is the aircraft's final approach and landing, where flight data suggests notable irregularities that may have played a role in the accident. The Learjet 35A was on a visual approach to runway 21 at Scottsdale Airport, a busy airfield just north of Phoenix with a single 8,149-foot-long runway. From the ADS-B flight data, it appears that the aircraft's speed control was well managed, with approach speeds ranging from 112 to 118 knots, which is within the recommended range for this type of aircraft. However, while the speed remained stable, the descent rate was highly unstable, which is a significant concern when analyzing the final moments of the flight. Looking at the vertical descent data, the aircraft initially maintained a descent rate of about 896 feet per minute at 139 knots, which is within a reasonable approach profile. But as it got closer to the runway, the rate of descent increased sharply. At one point, the aircraft was descending at 1,700 feet per minute, which is considered too steep for a stabilized approach. It even spiked to 2,000 feet per minute at its peak. A safe and controlled descent for a Learjet should ideally be 1,000 feet per minute or less, especially in the final moments before touchdown. A key factor in this instability is that the aircraft briefly ballooned above the proper glide path, meaning it gained altitude or didn't descend as expected for a short period. This forced the pilots to correct their approach by increasing their rate of descent, which may have resulted in a harder than normal landing. The last recorded descent rates just before touchdown ranged between 700 and 1,000 feet per minute, which is still on the high end for a safe landing. Investigators will need to determine exactly how hard the aircraft touched down and whether this high descent rate put additional stress on the landing gear structure. Security camera footage and eyewitness reports confirm that the left main landing gear failed immediately upon touchdown, specifically at the top of the strut where it connects to the wing. This failure was the trigger for the accident, not a secondary result of the aircraft sliding off the runway. The Learjet veered off course and collided with a parked Gulfstream 200, which fortunately stopped it from continuing into the lobby of the Southwest Jet Center. Another important factor is that one of the engines continued running after the crash, which could have posed an additional risk had there been a post-crash fire. Fortunately, there was none, preventing further damage or injuries. However, this detail may be relevant in analyzing the sequence of events post-impact and whether the pilots had full control of the aircraft up until the final moment. Another question arose from the failure of the left main landing gear was whether it was an isolated event or the result of pre-existing damage. A photo circulating online suggests that this aircraft's left main landing gear had sustained damage in a previous landing incident in Arkansas. The image shows a flattened or shredded left tire, a missing landing gear door, and visible fluid leakage from the landing gear area. These details are critical because they indicate possible structural or hydraulic issues that may not have been fully addressed before the Scottsdale crash. Investigators will take a deep dive into the aircraft's maintenance records and repair history to determine whether the previous damage was properly inspected and repaired. One of the key aspects of landing gear maintenance is ensuring that any stress or impact damage does not lead to long-term weaknesses. If the aircraft had a hard landing or an issue with hydraulic pressure in the past, it's possible that hidden stress fractures or weakened components were already in place before this accident. The NTSB will need to examine whether there were any ongoing hydraulic leaks, fatigue cracks, or structural wear that may have contributed to the failure in Scottsdale. The Learjet 35A, first introduced in the 1970s, remains a popular aircraft, but keeping an older jet airworthy is no small task. This particular aircraft, a 1989 model, had been flying for over 3 decades, which means it had likely gone through multiple overhauls, part replacements, and repairs. While older Learjets can be relatively affordable to purchase, they are often very expensive to maintain, especially when it comes to critical structural components like the landing gear. Investigators will carefully review the aircraft's logbooks, past inspection records, and maintenance work orders with a specific focus on the landing gear system. One major concern is age-related wear and tear. Over time, repeated stress from landings, pressurization cycles, and environmental exposure can lead to metal fatigue, corrosion, and hydraulic system degradation. The NTSB will assess whether routine inspections were properly conducted and if there were any deferred or incomplete repairs related to past landing incidents. We also wonder if this particular Learjet had undergone the necessary structural reinforcements or part replacements required for its age. Some older aircraft require specialized maintenance programs to monitor high-stress areas like the landing gear attachment points, hydraulic actuators, and support struts. If these inspections were missed, rushed, or not performed to the manufacturer's specifications, there's a real possibility that the left main landing gear was already compromised before this flight. Now that the aircraft has been recovered, NTSB inspectors will conduct a forensic examination of the left main gear assembly, searching for signs of prior damage, metal fatigue, or hydraulic failure. Some key questions they will seek to answer may include: was the gear failure caused by pre-existing structural weakness or metal fatigue? Did any hydraulic leaks or actuator issues play a role? Were past repairs on the landing gear properly completed and documented? And could this failure have been prevented with more thorough maintenance or earlier part replacements? And finally, investigators will also need to examine the length of the flight and the potential for pilot fatigue, which can significantly affect decision-making and aircraft handling. The Learjet's journey began in Florida, making its way across multiple states before making a fuel stop in Texas, and then proceeding to Scottsdale, Arizona. While this kind of cross-country trip is not uncommon for private jets, it does raise concerns about crew duty hours, rest periods, and overall fatigue levels at the time of landing. The cumulative duration of the flight, including the time spent preparing the aircraft, managing the fuel stop, and executing the approach into Scottsdale, can have a gradual but serious impact on pilot performance. Long-haul flights, even with fuel stops, demand continuous situational awareness, constant aircraft monitoring, and sustained concentration. By the time the crew was executing the final approach into Scottsdale, they had likely been in the cockpit for several hours, managing multiple phases of flight. Fatigue is known to impair cognitive function, reaction times, and decision-making, all of which are critical during the high workload phase of landing. Even small lapses in judgment, such as delayed throttle adjustments, misjudged descent rates, or reaction delays when correcting an unstable approach, can be the difference between a safe landing and a hazardous one. In this case, the Learjet's unstable descent rates and last-minute glide path corrections may have been influenced by pilot exhaustion or decreased reaction time due to extended duty hours. Investigators will review crew scheduling records, flight duty logs, and rest periods to determine whether the pilots had adequate sleep and breaks before undertaking this trip. The circadian rhythm factor will also be considered. If the flight took place outside the crew's normal working hours, the pilots may have been experiencing physiological fatigue, even if they technically met legal rest requirements. While fatigue alone may not be the sole cause of the accident, it is a well-documented risk factor in aviation incidents. If the pilots were mentally or physically fatigued, their ability to execute a stable approach, recognize an excessive descent rate, or anticipate landing stresses on the gear may have been diminished. Investigators will determine if crew exhaustion played a role in the approach difficulties and the overall sequence of events leading up to the crash. So that's what we've got so far. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next videos.